Setting message data. Let's review the structure of MMUULLEE messages. MMUULLEE messages consist of inbound properties set by the source, outbound properties added by us, payload, the core of the message, and attachments, ancillary info to the message. The inbound and outbound properties. Inbound properties are set from the message source, and we as developers only have read access. They will also persist throughout the flow. Outbound properties are added by message processors. This means we can read and write to them, giving us the ability to set, remove, and copy those properties. Giving an example of how the inbound property structure would work, if an inbound HTTP request came into MMUULLEE, the data being posted into MMUULLEE would become the payload, but the header ancillary metadata would become inbound properties set from the message source that received that HTTP request. On the flip side, with outbound message properties, if we were sending our MMUULLEE message out through an HTTP request, the payload could become the body of that posted request, and any outbound properties would effectively become the headers of the HTTP request. The message payload is the core of the MMUULLEE message. It contains the primary info we'll be processing, and essentially is containing a Java object. Attachments are ancillary info to the message. Transports like email or SOAP might use the attachment scope. Payloads are going to be the primary focus in this class because it's essentially the data we're trying to move around. And payloads can be represented in many ways. One of the categories you'll see is a raw data. This type of data is usually represented by a string, an input stream, or a byte array. The idea of raw data is that it's going to be somewhat unparsed. It's just a raw format of the data. Structured data, on the other hand, is when we have data that's turned into something like a map where we can access key value pairs, or a structured Java object, like our own order account class. On the message, we have the ability to set different pieces, one of which is setting the payload. This sets the value of the message payload. The expression that you'll see very soon to access the payload is message.payload. Property, on the other hand, allows us to set, remove, and copy properties on the outbound scope of a message. This is accessed by message.outbound properties. These are transformers that you'll see in the MMUULLEE palette within Studio, and we'll get to work with these very soon. Walkthrough 5.1, set and log message data. We're now going to get in Studio and create our own sample project. We will set the message payload, set outbound properties, and log the message's content in the console, learning a little bit about some of these structural items of the MMUULLEE message. Let's get started. Starting in Anypoint Studio, let's make sure we close our existing APDev American WS project. That way we can ensure we don't accidentally make changes to it. Once APDev American WS is closed, let's make a new examples project. We can do this by right-clicking in the Package Explorer, going to New, and choosing MMUULLEE Project. Once you've selected New MMUULLEE Project, let's call this APDev-examples. We'll once again choose our newest runtime, keep all other settings as default, and hit Finish. Okay, now that we've got our APDev examples project, let's set up some flows that we can play with. First, we're going to expose this on HTTP. So just like the other modules, we can search in the palette for HTTP and drag the HTTP element into our canvas. Once we drop the HTTP element into the canvas, we can double click on it and create a new connector configuration for the HTTP element. Once again, same rules apply. We're going to keep port as 8081 in this video, but if you've had to use a different port in class, feel free to change that now so that your computer can expose the port effectively. For now, I'm going to keep mine as 8081 and hit OK. The path of this HTTP listener is going to be hello. And once we've got hello set inside of our flow, let's now put something in the process area. Specifically, let's write to the message's payload. To do this, we'll find the set payload transformer and drag set payload into the process phase. With set payload double-clicked, in the value box, we can remove the expression brackets and put in a message of hello world. Next, let's add a property to the flow. So just like we can set the payload, we can also set properties. In the search box, if we type in property, you'll see there's a message property filter, and then below that there are property operations. Let's take the property operations and drag that to the right of set payload. With the property transformer selected, we can set a new property. And for the name, let's call this property QP name. For the value, let's give this a name of max. Lastly, let's log the message as it moves through the flow. We'll go to our palette once again. We'll search for the logger component. And let's drag logger to the right of property and drop it into our flow. For now, don't worry about configuring anything in the message area of the logger. We'll use the default configuration. Let's see how this application runs. We'll click inside of the canvas, make sure that the entire application is saved, and then let's run this application on our machine. Once the application has started up successfully, let's head back to Postman to make another request into our flow. With Postman open, we'll set up a fresh request. In this request, we're going to send to HTTP localhost 8081/hello. Once you've got this URL here, hit send. And after hitting send, just as you'd probably expect, we should see Hello World responding inside of Postman. Now, another thing that we should notice inside of here, if we click on the headers area, is that a QP name was added into the headers box. This is an effect, as we saw in the slides, of having an outbound property set on our mule message. Now let's return to Studio. In AnyPoint Studio, if we expand the console by double-clicking, we can see that a logger fired off on the info level. Now this logger has some interesting information inside of it. First off, we can see that the payload type was a Java string. We can see that the inbound properties that came in from the Postman request included some of these various headers and some of these default HTTP inbound properties set by the message source. We can see invocation scoped variables, which you'll learn more about, outbound scoped variables, which included our QP name, and session scoped variables as well. Now, we'll double click to minimize the console, and we'll stop the application.